The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask is out on Nintendo Switch, online and 64 expansion pack, and with it, we have to address probably the most controversial question in Majora's Mask. Originally released for Nintendo 64 in 2000, but most recently updated in Hyrule Encyclopedia as a dream world created by the Skull Kid with the Majora's Mask. And this suggestion came as late as in 2017, along with the release of Breath of the Wild, and also placed Link's Awakening before the two Oracle games in the Zelda timeline. Two very, and I mean very controversial changes to the Zelda canon, but where at least one of them has been repeated over and over again, and that is the timeline change. So, could Majora's Mask be another dream game just like Link's Awakening now is to A Link to the Past? Well, let's start off with this very, and I mean very soul-crushing quotes, which are very controversial and also very contradicting to past information about Majora's Mask. And don't worry, we'll get back to multiple times throughout this entire video, including towards its end. So let's go over the 3 controversial quotes. Quote number 1. The combination of the Skull Kid's burdened heart and the evil magic within Majora's Mask transforms the world into the land of Termina. Termina is a parallel world with its own distinct culture, which is perhaps influenced by Majora's ancient tribe. Quote 2. The 4 giants were spirit friends of the Skull Kid, who much like Termina itself were created in a new form by the power of Majora's Mask. And finally, quote 3. While the hero's pure heart allows the world of Termina to momentarily revel in its salvation, as soon as he departs, that world ceases to exist. And that is of course a very, and I mean very controversial statement. You could also say they are rather bold assumptions or possibly even declarations, which forces us to simply play devil's advocate, and we're starting nowhere else but in the Lost Woods. Since already here things could be off, as Link is literally dropped off Epona after she's scared by the Skull Kid. And this might be where the Skull Kid starts her scheme, namely luring Link into his and Majora's creation of trickery and sorrow. So let's have a look at what really happens. The Skull Kid picks up the ocarina while also lifting up his mask, which you all know does not originate from Termina as it belonged to the Happy Mask Salesman, who, under these assumptions, could be argued to be the only other real character under the Skull Kid cross Majora scenario in the game apart from the 2 fairies, as his aim is clear: to reclaim the stolen mask. Unless he too is a creation of the Skull Kid that has been placed to aid Link in this dream world, and the real Happy Mask Salesman remains still in Hyrule. A tree that leads into a dream world, and where Link ends up on a flower right before being turned into a Deku Scrub. Not only that, but after the transformation, Skull Kid leaves Tattle behind with Link. It is clear that the Skull Kid might have intended to not leave Link behind alone, because where's really the fun in that? After all, Majora's Mask is a lot about Skull Kid having fun with Termina and Link. And with this assumption or declaration in Hyrule Encyclopedia, you could see it in a way where he tries to have fun in a dream world where he is the creator, due to his trickery is despised by those he has created. And when you can't play with the inhabitants of Clocktown, you instead create a living nightmare for them and test the hero in the process by showing you're behind. It is clear that the Skull Kid knows you're there, and he's just waiting for you to come and challenge him, all in the name of fun. And here we have to point out one key detail differing between Link's Awakening's Koholint and Majora's Mask's Termina. Namely that one, a spiritual whale, cannot wake up due to nightmares, while the other is simply having too much fun with the powers of Majora's Mask that he rubbed from the Happy Mask Salesman, at least if we believe Hyrule Encyclopedia, that is. And there's a lot of inconsistencies when it comes to Majora's Mask, especially how Epona ended up in Termina, and it may also be asked how the Happy Mask Salesman is there. It seems that he is actually one of the characters that exist, and is a victim, just like Link in the second quest of the Hero of Time. So there's some uncertainty whether the Happy Mask Salesman we meet inside the clock tower is actually the real one. It's absolutely possible that he is the only Hylian, not counting Link, that is actually really in Termina, hence why his aid is deliberate. The Skull Kid just wants to mess with you, but the Happy Mask Salesman knows that if he can get the mask back, then the sword will be knocked out of his perpetrator's hand. Naturally, greed and his obsession with collecting masks fuels the Happy Mask Salesman, but he is also the only person who knows the dangers of the mask, which was crafted by the ancient tribe to hold the terrifying demon within. Hence why Encyclopedia points to that Termina was perhaps shaped from the culture that brought Majora. Possibly the same ancients who were later banished to the Twilight Realm, but after they created the fused shadow which undeniably resembles Majora's Mask in Twilight Princess. Skull Kid must have felt like a god throughout this entire game, but in reality he was just a puppet for Majora, which eventually put an end to the playtime and trickery and showed its true face in the final hour, disregarding the Skull Kid to prevent the intervention of Link and the puppet spirit friends, who in Termina took the form of the 4 giants. Spirit friends, but from where? Most likely the Lost Woods. In other words, despite being in this creation called Termina and easing the pain of its inhabitants, it at the end of the day doesn't matter as everything surrounding us isn't real. The mirrored NPCs, which have different roles, are another example of this, and Termina could thus have been founded on a blend of 2 cultures. Skull Kid as a Hylian child from Hyrule who got lost in the Lost Woods and lost everything near and dear to him, and Majora and its ancient tribe. This potential combination makes Termina so eerie, as the servant Deku to Queen Goma in Hyrule are literal kings in Termina, the equivalent to Talon is a pub not ranch owner, the Zora salt not freshwater creatures, the Gorons live in cold alpine mountains instead of a volcanic range, the Gerudo being seafaring pirates instead of desert people, and the list goes on and on. A blend of 2 different cultures and lands, and though there are numerous new characters, many of these might just be references back to the time of Majora, like the Garo ninjas and Ikana warriors, all long dead as the unresolved conflict ended back in ancient times, but the war continued through their spirits. We can also not forget how Majora's Mask is very likely a journey of the 5 stages of grief, but for who? Most likely Link, who lost Navi and departed Hyrule to Waikuteru, when in reality the fairy companion was already gone. Termina thus became Link's path to move on from his past, so in a way you can say that the Skull Kid both tormented, but at the same time also helped. Thus Link does not attack the Skull Kid after defeating Majora, but instead become friends. Something that is hinted at in the final post-credit scene, where we see a cut-down tree stub with the Hero of Time and the Skull Kid depicted with the 4 giants. And this final frame cannot be understated, as it might hint at what was real in Termina for the Skull Kid all along. Himself, his fairy friends, his spirit friends who took the form of the 4 giants, and last but not least, Link. The Skull Kid, however, is afraid of the Happy Mask Salesman, as what kind of person obtains such a dangerous mask and then is sad when the demon within is destroyed? Definitely a person who places more value in objects than people, while the Skull Kid just wants to have fun with his Hylian or human friends. Well, that is those he can have. At the end, his trickster nature stood in the way, and the defeat of Majora made the Skull Kid realize that Link is his friend, but with the spirit of Majora defeated by the Hero of Time, the jubilant Termina ceased to exist shortly after the end credits. The reasoning behind the change in the most recent release, going over the complete chronology in the series, points to the possible fact that we should take the side worlds of Hyrule and New Hyrule in the Zelda series with a side of salt, as they are often the domain of Skull Kids, evil demons and powerful whales, which are the masters, or if you prefer gods, of these lands. 3 quests that follow shortly after a defining quest in the homeland Hyrule, and which can easily be removed from the timeline, and still doesn't have a great impact or remove the games that follow after them. They were always intended to be side quests for the hero after fulfilling his duty against Ganondorf Ganon, and this is seen in Link's Awakening, Phantom Hourglass, and now possibly with the text presented in Hyrule Encyclopedia, Majora's Mask. Now, after playing devil's advocate by presenting argument after argument, what do I think of all of this and the controversy found within Hyrule Encyclopedia? I find it interesting, as the only consequence at the end of the day is whether Termina continued to exist or not after Link left it. And even if it ceased to exist, this is knowledge that the Hero of Time could not possess, meaning that he believed that he had saved 2 different worlds in 2 different time and space realities. It is just that his later path was tragic, and at his death, he was not remembered as a hero and ended up as the Hero's Shade, a destiny that the Skull Kid, whether willingly or coincidentally, had a significant impact to. A future that will bring the Hero of Twilight, where the Hero of Time spirit will prepare to deal the final blow to Ganondorf. Hence there's a possibility that Majora's Mask may have been set in an artificial world, but the adventure Link and we went through was as real as the quests we make within our own Zelda adventures. Of course, the one we conduct with controllers in hand. And that is what matters to us playing, and hence why Majora's Mask more than deserves its central spot in the Zelda timeline. With that being said, I would have preferred if this change did not surface in Hyrule Encyclopedia, and was promoted heavily by Nintendo, including with a special edition Zelda NES cartridge edition in the West, one which I personally own. But I do really hope that this statement in Hyrule Encyclopedia is false. along with Triforce Heroes being part of the timeline. Darn it, there we have another example of a Master Sword quest being followed by something that doesn't significantly impact the games after. And that is our theory, or more take, on the information given in Hyrule Encyclopedia. Personally, I obviously hope that Termina was real, as this is one of my 3 favorite The Legend of Zelda games of all time. Please leave a like, subscribe to our channel as we are less than 6,000 away from 300,000, and press the notification bell to not miss any future Zelda theories and Breath of the Wild 2 videos, and also be qualified for our Big Switch OLED Plus game giveaway. Last but not least, a great thanks to all our patreon.com/CommonRealm patrons, and in particular to role producer Charles Shash. You rock, and please enjoy one or both of these 2 awesome videos.